Welcome to the Profile Corner. In the last video we left off building the step stool, which was designed by John Heinz, and I've made some adjustments to its dimensions and also the thickness of some of the boards. And we stopped at the point of preparing to cut the stretchers. I have some boards here just loosely fitted into the spots where the stretchers will go, as you can see up here also. And when I say loosely fitting, it actually fits quite tightly side to side. I resawed this longer board. It was originally 15/16 of an inch thick. This was a leftover board from one of the steps, and I sawed it so that it was about 3/1000 over 3/4 of an inch, and so it fits in very snugly, which is nice to see. And so now what we need to do is we need to cut a 5-degree miter on the ends of these boards, and then we have to deal with this tapered portion right down here, which we cut on the PantoRouter to 20 degrees. And because these legs are splayed out 5 degrees on each side, the effective angle of this slope is actually about 15 degrees for these boards. And so we'll need to cut those very likely using the bandsaw. And so we'll get started on that very soon. I only rough cut these to dimensions. I have not yet cut them to length. And I did notice afterwards that I gave potentially a wrong dimension of the height of these boards. In the previous video I said that they needed to be 1 17/32 tall. I did a remeasurement and I found that they actually need to be 1 9/16 of an inch tall. So it's 1/32 taller than what I mentioned earlier. And so hopefully that didn't cause anybody any problems, and you're actually measuring what you're getting in your boards if you're building this step stool, rather than relying on the measurements that I'm giving, just to make sure that your step stool is as accurate as possible. Okay, so what I think I'll do first is I'll cut a 5-degree miter on the ends of these boards, cutting them to the right length, or maybe a 1/16 of an inch oversize in length. And then we'll come back to the bandsaw and we'll cut the tapered section into the boards. I have the stretchers cut to the correct length now. The bottom one here ended up being 15 3/4 inch long, pretty much exactly. The top one here ended up at 14 inches and a little bit less than 5/16. So a little more than 14 1/4 and a little less than 14 5/16 by 32nd. So I've got these fitted into place, and now what I need to do is measure this gap that's at the bottom here. And that looks like it's a little bit less than 3/16. I should get the same reading down here as well. Okay, and I do see that. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll make a mark on the inside of where that needs to be cut on all the boards. Okay, I've set the stop on my ruler to just less than 3/16 of an inch by a little bit less than a 32nd of an inch. And I've taken my bevel gauge, which is still set at 5 degrees, And on each of those boards where I made a mark, I extended that line up using that 5-degree bevel. I did that on all 2 of the boards. And now what I should be able to do is to take this ruler, put it onto the board here, and that establishes where this corner needs to be, right there. And then I'll just draw a line from that point to the point down here, and that gives me where I need to bandsaw to make that cut. Okay, we're ready to cut. These 0.5 millimeter graphite lines are a little bit hard to see, but I think I can pick them out. These have all been cut now, both ends. I'll take a sharp chisel and just lightly polish the marks left by the bandsaw. Try to make them a little bit smoother so that the glue will adhere a little bit better. Okay, so now that's been done. So let's do a test fit here and see whether or not these fit correctly. Okay, I think that'll work. I still need to make sure that everything's aligned correctly and that should work out for us and look nice and add a lot of strength. And these are still not down quite as far as they need to go, so I may need to fine-tune that a little bit. And by the way, each of these steps increase 7 5/8 of an inch, and so that should still be a comfortable height to use this. And I may end up adding on a third step on the back as something that can be optionally added on as needed. The top stretcher has been fitted in. It took about 5 or 6 attempts using the sharp chisel to whittle it down so that this end fit correctly. The other end went in pretty easily, and so now I need to work on this bottom stretcher. I'll do that off camera, and then we'll come back and we'll add in kind of a sculpted feature down here on the bottom of this, because I've got a concrete floor and I can't trust that it's going to be flat all the way across this length. And so what I'll do is I'll create a foot on here, similar to what John did in his plans, except that he used straight lines. But I've got a bandsaw, so I'll just bandsaw that as an arc. Okay, just a little bit of bandsawing left. And then we'll take a router here on these edges to break them so that they're not so sharp. And then we'll do some final sanding, and then we'll get it glued up. I have a 1/4 inch roundover bit mounted into the trim router. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a roundover on all edges of the top step, and then on the bottom step I'll be making a roundover up to about right here. And then starting again over here, going across, and then skipping a portion here, and then going across again. This is where the board will intersect up here, and so I don't want to have that rounded over. And then on the back side, I'll be adding in a roundover on these edges here, skipping this back section. Okay, I'm going to put down a mat for the routers to keep these boards from sliding around. Okay, I've got the router mat onto the table, and now they should not move around. I've rotated these boards around 180 degrees so that these pencil marks are facing me, so that hopefully that'll remind me not to cut in this section here and also in this section here. Okay, so these should look nice when mounted up onto here. Obviously that's the wrong step. Here's the correct step. And it appears as though I missed a little bit right through here. So let's take care of that real quick. And when you're using a router, of course, you want to make sure that all your motions are smooth and that you're doing the end grain first as best as possible, and you're moving in a counterclockwise rotation most of the time, although there are times when you need to move in a clockwise motion just to prevent some chip out or tear out, and I didn't have to do that in this case. And usually you don't have to do that with a small roundover bit like what I've got mounted into the router here. Okay, so now the next step is to do a thorough sanding on all the parts that make up our step stool. Okay, now it's time to create the slate round in the bottom of the legs here. So what I did was I measured over 3 inches from each end, and then in the center here I measured up 1/4 inch and just drew a straight line. And what I'll do is I'll cut that at the bandsaw, and then when I'm cleaning it up at the oscillating spindle sander, I'll actually turn that into a slate radius so that it won't look like 2 connected straight lines. And I'll do that on both of the legs. Here's the result after sanding. So it looks like it's a very slight radius, or a cross between 2 straight lines and a radius. Okay, let's get this glued up. I've temporarily installed the bottom stretcher and also the 2 steps so that I can get this top stretcher in the right position. I believe I have the legs splayed out at 5 degrees right now using the bevel gauge. And before I removed the stretcher board, I marked it left and right, so I made sure that I got it into the same orientation. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.